Hey everyone, welcome you all to the Baseline Show. My name is Samrat and I welcome you on the Baseline Show every Wednesday at noontime EST, which is 6 p.m. Central European Time, and we also do it at 10:30 p.m. India time. We invite industry leaders from across the world and talk about topics related to data exchanges, multi-party workflows, and we try and explore use cases for baseline protocol. So today, in the series of baseline shows that we do, today we have Javier from Osprey. Javier and we met a few days back at Token 2049 conference in Singapore. And I had made a point, when I went there that I'm going to find somebody interesting to come to one of these shows and talk to us about a potential use case for baseline. And here is Javier. We happened to meet not in the main event, but one of the side events, probably holding a beer at the time. But yeah, I think it immediately struck as what they're doing, and I would let Javier talk more about what they're doing. But what they're doing is immediately struck as a potential gold mine for baseline. So here is Javier from Osprey. Please go ahead, introduce yourself to our audience, and uh, talk to all of us about what Osprey is doing, and uh, and yeah, let's take it from there. Before we, I am so sorry. Before we go there, people who are watching us for the first time, do subscribe to the channel. We keep making announcements here, and we do these live shows every Wednesday. And do visit baseline-protocol.org. That is our website, and you can hit get involved. Or if you're a company which is looking to get baseline, hit get baseline, and we'll be in touch with you. All right. Over to you, Javier.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Javier Tamashiro. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Osprey. So we started this company like, let's say 2 years ago, working full time, and most of us we were working in traditional finance. I was working in banking. The CTO was working in an insurance company. There was also people working in credit card payment companies, and I think that the idea started from when we got involved in a couple of crypto projects, like around 2015, like a long time ago. Um, and essentially, what happened was that we we got involved in crypto, but always having in mind the idea of compliance, right? So we start designing a solution that essentially the industry may need in the future, but always thinking like, okay, so if this really is going to take off as an industry, there will be a need for a new generation of compliance solutions that operate on top of blockchain, right? There is a lot of debates about compliance in the crypto space. Some people disagree whether this is kind of hurting the industry or this is positive. But essentially what we see, especially what happened in the last couple of months, we see more validation on the idea that there is a need for more compliance in a way and protecting consumers. So essentially what we do is we have a platform that has different modules. And in the same way that exists regulations in banking, there are regulations that are applied in crypto, right? So there are processes, there are validation of data, controls, integration of multiple tools, systems, a lot of things that happen in the same way that happen in banking now are happening progressively in crypto, right? So essentially, we are building the set of solutions that enable crypto companies to be compliant. So depending the ecosystem where your business is operating, you may have different regulations. Some countries are more mature than other ones in terms of compliance. But crypto, by definition, is cross-border. So that means that nearly doesn't matter where you are. At some point, you're going to be affected by compliance regulations, right? So there is one new requirement that it's being enforced in a few countries like Singapore and in the European Union called the travel rule, which essentially is kind of the SWIFT network for crypto, right? And the core idea is that you need to attach an identity to a crypto transaction to remove this idea of anonymity, right? So that is bringing a lot of technical challenge because companies were not doing this before, and there is a lot of information that you need to have ready in order to implement the travel rule. And as I said, so there are some countries that are moving faster. So essentially, if you are in a company in Europe, in Germany, for example, and you want to trade with another exchange in Australia, in one place the travel rule is enforced, and then the other one is not. So essentially, when you're trying to make a transfer, then you are in a situation because on one side you need to comply and send your customer data, but on the other side there is no company ready to respond, right? So essentially, you as an exchange may be in a dilemma whether you stop the transfer and upset your client, or you kind of breach the regulation because you need to move forward with the transfer without being able to kind of operate with the other company in the way that is expected, right? Of course, there are alternatives. So we are building one solution that help companies to move forward in those scenarios. But yeah, so this is essentially what we are doing. So I'm sure if you open a bank account before, or you open a crypto account in Kraken or Binance before, you know what is compliance in the sense of having you to provide data that then the exchange is going to use to validate against different systems. After your account is activated, then when you start trading, there are also another set of compliance tools that apply for the company to monitor what are your activities and if there are any red flag or financial crime risk. And now with this new requirement called the travel rule that I was mentioned before, now you need to exchange your data with other entities when you trade, right? Yeah, so that's essentially what we do.
Excellent. And Javier, a common person would ask, how do you know about these accounts? How do you come across? How do you gather that data?
The data of the clients, you mean, or the data of on-chain data?
Actually, both. Let's hear about both.
Okay, so well, there are these a multiple process of collecting information. So when we are talking about clients, the process is quite intuitive. So it's the company asking their clients to provide information, right? In the same way when you open a bank account, you need to provide your details, then your ID. The bank is going to validate against the ID, your data, run checks against sanction, blacklist, and see if there is something unusual. That's the very traditional way of running the KYC, which is the first step of the onboarding process, right? In a financial institution or a crypto company. I would say that the second stage is when your account is activated and then you want to operate and send and receive transactions in crypto, right? So that's when
Okay.
the blockchain analytic piece start running. So that's a pretty complex process of using on-chain data to identify situation of risk. Maybe one way of describe what that really means is, so out of all the universe of address hashes, essentially what a blockchain analytic company does is trying to associate label of risk to each of those addresses. So depending on the severity of those labels, the risk increase or really it goes lower, right? So how those labels are generated is it's a complex process of clustering data, associating data with entities. Like for example, if you identify that there is an address controlled by an entity that is in a sanctioned country, so the address inherent the risk of the entity in a way, right? And then the next step would be trying to identify what other addresses the same entity control. And then from that point, then you move forward and then, okay, what are all the transactions coming in and going out from those addresses? And then you expand, let's say, the cloud of risk, right? And at different degrees, degree 1, 2, 3. right? And then when we are talking about the travel rule, is essentially is think about like the Swift network in banking. So you as a customer, your data is going to be used to complete a transaction or initiate a transaction, right? So essentially, the data is coming from the client in most cases, and the financial institutions, the crypto entity is going to collect it, make sure that it's complete, standardized, accurate, and then will initiate the transfer with another entity, right? So there are a lot of sources. So essentially, just to say in very wild terms, what we do is help companies to follow rules, to be compliant, right? That's essentially the principle. The implementation is super complex because each country has different regulations. There are thresholds, the data from everywhere. It's a very liquid industry. There are a lot of things going on. There are also a lack of skills because not that many people specialize in crypto compliance. It's a kind of a new field. Yeah, so that for many reasons, it's not an easy area. Also, something that we notice is when it comes to the implementation of compliance in a crypto entity, typically the CTO is not super excited about compliance, and the compliance officer is not so technical savvy. So you put all these people in the same room, and things take weeks or months because nobody understands each other. There is a lot of disagreement, and depending on how the ideology of the CEO of the company, there may be some pushback because some people, they have their questions about compliance. But what we have, I think what we have very clear is that the direction is moving to more regulations, especially what happened after FTX, right? That we there, for us there is no doubt that that's the direction. Yeah.
FTX was a lack of enforcement. Regulations is there. It's just a lack of enforcement.
Yeah,
right?
there are many.
It's very simple. If the regulator says, it's like you need to produce those compliance reports to us on a regular basis, and if you don't, we're going to shut you down. You don't have a choice, right? It's like it doesn't matter what you think. ETH is right. It doesn't matter, right? It's just a question of whether it's being enforced or not. So the rules are on the book, right? It's just like if the SEC says we think everything's a security, you didn't register. It's like you get a letter, register, not okay, your problem, right? Yeah. So I find that there's not enough regulation. There is no sufficient commentary how current regulation in detail applies to every different type of crypto asset. Right? There's that. I think that's just simply that it's the regulation's there. It's just the regulator hasn't specified how to categorize the asset, and therefore which regulation which detailed reports need to be filed when, right? So it's like not when, but just like which reports have to be filed with the regulator. That's, by the way, also an issue with the self-regulation, right? With FINRA. So it's like FINRA is the national body for every crypto crypto trading entity. They should be a member of FINRA. And in fact, if they're not and they're operating in the FINRA space, FINRA should take them to court if they actually care, but they don't.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that they apparently it was highly, let's say, regulated. The FATX, they had a lot of licenses, so Let's make.
Well, it's Bahamas, right? So that's that's all relative, right? Plus, it's like based on what you think, it's like how many people you've actually met actually understand this stuff. Like, honestly, how many?
You know?
How
Yeah, I
many?
mean, it's super complex, the structure of how things could be done in the crypto space. So I think that there is also but this is still arguable. Like there is like a learning curve from regulators as well. So how things should be. You're asking about enforcement. So, but you need to understand the ecosystem to being able to enforce.
Right. So I make a bold statement. There are less than 10 people on the regulator side globally that understand this stuff properly. Less than 10.
So which means the rest of them don't, and they're going to misapply it.
They don't, and because they don't, they avoid it like the plague, and they're just and only if something bad happens, then they take action, and then they just it's like, oh, we're just using it this way, right? We're just applying the regulation this way, and it's all your fault. No, it's actually your fault too, because you didn't do anything. But Javier, I have actually a question based on that. Like, how are you actually doing the source of fund check?
No, we don't do that. This is not our domain, actually. It's we specialize in anti-money laundering compliance that involved essentially helping institutions to identify and mitigate situation of financial crime risk. But I mean, maybe your mind is okay. What this is?
Yeah,
it's so much connected. Yeah, but from
how do you know that the ease that this guy got is not from a fentanyl dark web exchange? How do you know?
You mean transactions or people or exchanges? At what level?
No, the funds that I am. So if I'm depositing ETH into Coinbase, right?
So how Coinbase check that your assets are not coming from an illegal source?
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there are different ways, but essentially when it comes to one of the things we specialize is in blockchain analytics. So essentially, blockchain analytics is the idea of you take an address or a transaction hash, and you try to connect that hash and trace back transactions or relationship and see if there are connections that could give you some red flags. Like, for example, is the address from where you are sending to Kraken linked to an entity that have a proper KYC compliance process, KYC process? There is a way to check that. So as soon as, let's say, for example, the transaction from where you are sending to Kraken, it's in a, I don't know, you named the jurisdiction, a high risk jurisdiction, right? So if the tool is able to connect that address with an entity, then the address, it immediately has a higher risk. Then Kraken, when it's receiving the payment, eventually could use that to raise questions on the incoming transaction.
Yeah, that's part of the KYC process, right? Because then part of the KYC process is you give a list of addresses, right, that you'll be using on the exchange, right? And normally, right, it's like you will have to, if the incoming money is not coming from an identifiable regulated entity, right? So if I bring cash to a bank, right, that exceeds the reporting amount, which is like $500, right? By now, that bank needs to file a SAR, suspicious activity report.
Yeah, well, so
right?
there are quite a few things there. Typically, the onboarding process involved collecting information that the customer provide and the documentation that the customer provide. Then they check that data against the document and see if there is a mismatch, and then they take the document and check that whether or not it's legit.
So
Right.
Javier, why don't you take us through one typical use case or one typical user journey? Who will be our typical customer? Who will take your service, and how will their customers come on board and stuff like that?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, let's go through okay. Let's take, for example, an exchange that is it's open an office in Estonia and is trying to get a license, right? So that exchange, in order to get a license, they will need to submit an application, and part of the application process, it's also they need to show that they have an anti-money laundering program. Part of that anti-money laundering program involves tools. So some of the tools that are required are provided by Osprey. So in a way, to get a license, you need to have Osprey, right? Another situation is when you want to open a new office in a new jurisdiction, you're expanding, you typically also, again, so you need to repeat the process. You open a new office, an application, and then you need to follow policies and prove that you have these tools. The process of the onboarding, the first part, everybody knows. So you collect data from customers that are filling forms, you validate all that information. The more technical part starts when the account is activated and you're receiving and sending crypto payments. So as you said, so there is incoming payment from, let's say you send funds to Kraken, or from Kraken you're sending payments to another entity. Well, so what you can do is this, what you said about, I think checking out those addresses. So that's typically called whitelisting. So you take the addresses and then you screen it and try to identify there are some risk associated. Then another way of implementing blockchain analytic internally is that trying to identify there are some unusual situations within the account. So for example, if the client is receiving incoming payments that are unusually high, or they don't correspond to the profile of the client, then that could be another red flag. And that could be implemented in different ways, like, for example, thresholds, or taking the history of the client and see if what is normal or what is unusual, and you compare with the payment that the client is receiving. An alternative way is creating profiles, and then when you have a client and you say, okay, these clients, looks like this profile, and then whatever is unusual for that profile, it may generate an alert for this client, right? So those are kind of way of designing controls internally, and essentially the trial rule is at the exercise of exchanging some information with other entities. Maybe what I can do is I walk you through a couple of decks, so it's a little bit more visual.
Yeah, and let's
Can
also
I
talk
can
a
I
little more
ask?
about travel rule. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask them very specific question, because
Yes,
that's
go ahead. Go ahead.
Because those are the I want to make it, because that directly relates also to being able to do something under zero knowledge. Right? It's like, so for example, so let me ask you this. If I'm taking ETH through a mixer and send that to an account that is registered, that I have registered with Kraken, right? Will you flag that? Will you flag that ETH if it's deposited from that account to Kraken?
Yeah, so what we can do is detect the mixer. the traceability behind the mixer, it's very difficult, if not
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is if I get a 50 ETH transaction into my account, into my external account that is registered as my account with Kraken, right? And I said now I have 150 ETH in there, and I want to trade 50 ETH.
Mhm.
Right? Your tooling alerts Kraken that there's a trade being executed for 50 ETH that comes from an account that received funds from a mixer, right?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at that. Yeah. So
Right.
and
What do
your
you do with?
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. So I mean, it's not black and white in many cases, because there are many situations that could justify that an account received payment from a mixer and the address is still legit. Like for example, you may not control who is sending you funds to your exchange, right? Maybe the question is what the exchange is doing with those transactions, right?
From a regulatory point of view, no. From a regulatory point of view, if they know that funds have been deposited that are coming from a potentially suspicious source, which a mixture is per interpretation from the U.S. Treasury, you need to flag that, and therefore before they're accepting that trade, they need to do additional due diligence on the funds.
Yeah.
On the funds, that have to go to the client and say, hey, we saw I know you have 150 ETH in there, but you just got 50 ETH from a mixer. Where does that come from? Right? Proof. Right. So otherwise we can't, because if they accept that trade and it turns out that the origin mixer address was controlled by a Mexican cartel, right? The guy goes to jail, and the Kraken gets fined millions of dollars for money laundering, right? Right. The same thing goes if it's much easier. I don't even need to run through a mixer, right? I'm just simply going to an L2, right? I move ETH to Arbitrum, right? Do Uniswap v3 to DAI, pull out the DAI into Ethereum, and then I'm depositing that into the registered Kraken account.
Yeah, what I meant is like the payments it's receiving to an account. It's a screen before when the payments goes in, and then if there is any red flag, it's blocked. That's typically what exchange.
I know, but what is your are funds that are coming from an L2 that have been originally coming from an L2 address marked as suspicious activity?
Oh yeah, I mean the address that received the payment, yes, it's affected.
Right, so it's like account A is registered with Kraken, right? Account B received funds from an L2, right? I transfer the funds from account B to account A, and now I want to trade those funds DAI, for example, on the exchange, on the centralized exchange.
Yeah, so we work with a number of blockchain analytic companies. So each company has a different way of generating risk and collecting data, processing the data. But overall, the logic is, as I said, so trying to identify situation of risk that then addresses our label, and then the transaction kind of propagate the risk in a way, right? Or if it's possible to identify the owner of the address, all the addresses controlled by the same entity somehow inherent the risk of that entity. So as you mentioned,
it might not be.
Yeah, but for example, if you mentioned the Mexican cartel. So let's say that an exchange based in Mexico is owned, I don't know, well, let's take another example, but let's say an entity that is in a sanctioned country, the typical cliche example of, and then the address is controlled by that entity, quite likely inherent the risk of the entity to some degree, right? So if you receive a
The
payment,
account is controlled by something you don't know, right? Might be a bot, right? So it's like you don't know, right? So unless you, so that's why, for example, was it FinCEN? Was it FinCEN? Is trying to create, they put out an advisory, was it for comment? I forgot, like a year ago, about exchanges accepting funds must provide reporting beyond
a specific threshold.
No. It's about next neighbor interactions. So that they need to KYC. So if account B sends, account A is KYC'd, right? The controller's KYC receives funds from account B, which is not controlled by the KYC'd entity, right? The regulation, the proposed regulation requires the exchange to do KYC on the entity controlling account B, which is more, significantly more than what traditional exchanges need to do.
So you're saying that in order to complete the payment, you need to run the KYC on the recipient entity?
No, you need to run the KYC on the entity that sent you funds that you want to use for the payment.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, well, I mean, that's typical. I think it's quite normal that if you are going to start a relationship with an entity and you're going to receive payments.
No, but what is more, right? So if I'm buying shares through a broker on an exchange, traditional exchange, is the normal thing, right? The broker is licensed, right? The broker does the KYC. The funds are coming from a regulated entity, aka a bank, right? And therefore, the regulation does not require that the exchange does the KYC. The exchange does the KYC on the broker, right? But this regulation says that the exchange needs to do the KYC on the broker and the bank, where the original payment for the share purchase comes from, right? Versus in the current setting, the broker does the KYC on the bank, or accepts that it's a registered regulated entity, and says, yes, that's good. And the regulation says, yes, we're assuming that you're doing that because you're only you would have to file otherwise a SAR with us if you're the broker and are receiving funds from a bank that is not either in the jurisdiction or that is, but anyway. So that's sufficient, right? The proposed regulation for the crypto goes one step further, and that's why everybody was up in arms, because you effectively can't do that, right? Because it's like you don't know, it's like the recipient of the funds might not even know who controls that.
Yeah, this we see this situation all the time. So we have a few asset managers in crypto, and what happened is most of them, they don't build their own infrastructure. They use other solutions. So they open,
of course,
accounts on Coinbase, Kraken, custody solutions. So when they send funds, essentially the blockchain analytic tool detect in many cases the company controlling from a technical point of view the address, but have no visibility in most cases on the entity that it's kind of legally control the address, right? So yes, I agree. This is a big topic, and actually it brings a lot of challenges, because the travel rule technically defined, it could make you it may require you to comply with the travel rule if you are one of those entities operating on top of platforms, right? So when
layer twos, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So when an entity wants to send to another address that is controlled by a layer 2 entity, then it's very difficult to identify who is the final entity behind that address, right? So, but it still is a virtual asset service provider, right? So, well, anyway, but this is a good point, and it's a big topic, and it's challenging. Yeah.
I hope you're taking something back, Javier, today. You know, where I would want this to see this happening. You know, there are crypto hedge funds definitely need to understand where their investors are coming from, and the other one can potentially be startups like yourself, who's raising funds and maybe has angel investors coming in saying, you know, here's my crypto, take investments from crypto. So,
but you know what? Sometimes when we get, I mean, nothing is perfect, right? The way we see is like we are transitioning to a new technology, and that has a cost, right? And essentially, what we offer is a risk management solution. So you're trying to identify and reduce the risk, and of course complying. But still, there are gaps, right? It's a process of improving the system, the controls. A lot of question marks, but the industry is kind of evolving and, let's say, getting better, if you want. But the concept of risk management is at the center of what we are doing.
Right. I mean, you need to monitor every single L2, all the mixers, and all the bridges on all chains.
Yeah, but I by the way, I also want to say something. So think about KYC, right? I'm sure you're familiar with the concept, but
no,
yeah. So, but it's still possible that you using cash, you have someone that open an account for you, you pass the money in cash, and that person deposit the money in the account in a bank, right? So still you're kind of
that's why right. And you're then, that's why, you know, if it's more than $500, they need to file a report, and because the individual is known with address and everything, if they think that there is a pattern, right? Because there are 150 different individuals depositing, you know, amounts that all go into one account, you will probably see that's a money laundering pattern. That's why you typically see a lot of things that are under $500. And that's why they're sending, I think now for overseas, it's like, is it what, like $100 now even? It's like where you need to, so it's like, because they're because it's, you know, it used to be $10,000. Now that becomes easier and easier, the amounts are going down and down and down, because people are, you know, because the adversaries are also getting more and more sophisticated, right? I mean, if I want to, you know, I can, you know, if you use like ZK rollups, then you have like zero visibility, right? There's like nothing you can do. If you have ZK rollups or optimistic rollups, you can still do transaction and analytics using the block explorer that these projects offer, right? You need to just use the API and pull the data down. If you're now in like ZK rollup land, that's gone. There's nothing there. It's fully anonymous. So the only thing that you can do is you can say, well, we can't accept funds that are coming that have it, that in any way, shape, or form have touched anonymizing technology.
Right.
Unless the entity can prove the entire chain of custody. There are
Yes.
legitimate reasons, but it's like you need to then disclose the entire chain of custody.
Yeah, I mean the in many cases what happened is that a mixer, it blocked the possibility of tracing back a transaction, but it's still the system can't detect that the transaction is coming from a mixer. So the red flag is still
You have to red flag it, right? So so what I'm saying is like you need to red flag every single transaction for or if an asset touches a mixer, if it touches an L2, if it touches, especially if it's a ZK rollup, or if it's a bridge, same thing, right? I can bridge Sol to ETH or the other way around, right? So it's like so because of the bridge ecosystem, you now need to trace across assets across L1s. Right. So again, it becomes so my question is, are you providing also tooling that like exchanges can use that can make it easier for their customers to provide that type of visibility? Because they might have legitimate reasons why they're using a ZK rollup or they're using a mixer.
If you enable me, I can share my screen.
Yeah, you can go ahead and share screen.
I cannot.
You might have to give him permission, Samrat.
I enabled it already because I thought that he's going to share our presentation.
No, you have disable participant screen sharing.
Okay, you should now have it.
I should be able now. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, can you see my screen? The presentation?
No.
Nope.
No, you cannot?
Yeah,
Do you have
while
like
you're fixing
two
that
screens?
Yeah, okay, let me try. Oh,
yeah,
no.
something is loading up. I just wanted to
Yeah, I
quickly
can see
welcome Jamie. Jamie is on the Baseline show today. He's generally not with us. Jamie is from Oasis. Thanks for making it today.
Okay. So Osprey.
Cheers, Samrat. It's been fun listening to this as a former securities lawyer.
Jamie, I'm sure you're having a field day. Sorry, go ahead.
Recovering securities lawyer. I don't know if there's ever an X one.
That's
All right. So
I thought I was recovering, and then I had a bunch of flashbacks during the recent FTX meltdown. So maybe not recovered. Yeah. Go ahead.
right. So yeah, so Osprey is we are under the umbrella of what we could be called RegTech. So we specialize in compliance. As I said, so we started like 2 years ago. The company is it has 2 offices today, one in Singapore and another one in LA, in California. And we have clients in APAC. We are growing very fast in Europe. We have a couple of clients in the US, and very soon we will have some in LATAM. So the type of clients that we have typically are asset managers, payment companies, exchanges. We had a couple of mining companies as well. Yeah, and the customer base is growing, especially in Europe right now. But we are about like 20 people in the company, counting some of the freelancers. And we are hiring more people in Europe, especially we are expanding the sales team. So this is essentially what our value proposition. So for those that are not familiar in compliance, crypto compliance, these are 3 compliance processes that nearly every crypto companies need to implement. It starts with the travel rule, which is essentially, you can think about like the SWIFT network of crypto, blockchain analytics, that is essentially the analytics of on-chain data and trying to identify financial crime risk. And know your customer is essentially what we all know that happen when we try to open up account in a bank, right? So collecting data, validating information, right? The reason why we are providing these 3 pieces is because, first, because it's a requirement. Second, because there is no company doing this. And probably the third one is because this is very difficult and painful for companies. In some cases, companies may not. This is so expensive to implement that in many cases it's prohibiting to go live. And also companies, they need to prove and show that they are running these processes internally, and they have the tools in many cases to obtain a license. So it's a very important element of the life of a company. When it comes to the travel rule, which is essentially where we are kind of right now focusing most of our effort, the way that explain where we operate, you can think maybe about two entities. VASP stand for Virtual Asset Service Provider, is a compliance terminology. And essentially you can think about this. The problem is super simple. So in the payment in the crypto public network essentially do not contain information of the people or the entities involved in the transaction. So you don't have information of who is the sender or who is the recipient. So the industry came up with this idea of bringing something that exists in banking from, I think, 1986 in the US, called the travel rule, which the concept is essentially attaching the identity of the parties involved in a banking transaction. But essentially the idea in crypto is doing the same, but using an alternative channel. So what you see here, these are protocols, travel rule protocols, right? So the data is not inside the public blockchain network, but is inside, it's exchanged through an alternative protocol. The problem is that these requirements is still not yet enforced in many countries. And essentially, when this was announced by FATF, which is an international organization that set the standard of anti-money laundering, I would say that it was kind of that accelerated the process of many companies trying to build protocols to gain market. And essentially what we see now is that there are like 10 to 15 companies fighting to get the largest stake in this ecosystem. So if you are an exchange, let's say in Europe and the US, and you're looking for travel rule protocols, then you are kind of confused which one is the one you should choose, because the space is very fragmented, right? So it's not even the problem is not that this is new, but it's fragmented. So we have companies connected to different protocols. So maybe one way you can think the problem is, it's like you buy a phone, but you are the only person in the world that has a phone, right? So then, okay, you are connected, you have a phone, but then you cannot talk to anyone. So as soon as more people have a phone, then you can talk to more people, and then the network start building. Now the problem is that there are many networks, right? Each protocol is kind of putting people in different network, right? So essentially, one of the things we are doing is we are connecting multiple protocols. So our clients, they don't have to connect by themselves with more than one protocol, right? What we think that is going to happen in the US is still not so popular, the travel rule, but in Europe, it's a super hot topic. The same in Singapore. What we anticipate that is going to happen is that there will be probably one protocol per economic zone. So probably there will be one in North America, one in Europe, and one in APAC. Probably in 5 years, we may not have too many, but a few, right? Yeah, essentially but the value proposition around the travel rule is about automation and building efficiency. Because what we think is going to happen is that the travel rule could be a huge problem in the coming quarters for many companies, because think about if you need to exchange your customer data with other entities, and first of all, you need to have this data ready. There is a format that it need to be used to standardize information. The information needs to be complete, updated, and think about if you have problems with the travel rule transfer and the transfer get blocked because of the travel rule. Think the cost how that is going to impact your business. So you will have probably a client that is upset because he's waiting hours or days for the transactions to be complete. Every transaction that gets blocked probably will involve some human verification, so your cost of compliance will skyrocket. And if you are processing thousands of transactions per minute, this could be insane, right? So efficiency is going to be a huge topic in the coming months. Yeah, so some of the aspect that make our solution different is that help you pre-validate the information, right? So you don't wait until starting the transfer to make all those checks that need to happen. You can do them before, right? And by doing that, you drop the number of chances that the transaction get blocked when it starts, right? And when I say checks, I'm talking about simple things like the quality of the data that is going to be used, or ongoing processes that could happen, like for example, the name screening of the sender, right? For example, things like this. Other aspect that make the solution unique is that, yeah, so each protocol will operate in different ways, but you have the feature that help you identify with the transaction, at what stage the transaction it is, and if there is an issue, you can go back and try to identify the problem. So the status tracker. Yeah, and one, yeah.
Quick question. So if let's say you've got the reputation of a particular wallet, so can that reputation ever change, or are you just going to blacklist it? And what if there are two of your customers who are trying to check for the same wallet? So do you check again, or do you just pass on the proof that you collected in the previous transaction and say to the second customer that, yeah, this wallet has already been checked and the reputation is not, or the score that you're giving?
Yeah, good question. We had a conversation with one of the protocols the other day. Technically, you have to do it again. Yeah. But this is kind of kind of open question. So how you want to implement your process internally? It could be your risk appetite if you want. So one situation is you are making a transfer to your exchange A to exchange B, right? And the transaction involved the same addresses a second time. The question is, do you need to run the same check again and again and again when you have repeat the same transaction? Yeah, it's a very good point. The conversation we had with some companies is yes, you do it again. Maybe one question is, you could do that, but depending if the transaction is repeated within certain amount of time, you may not. If you repeat the same transaction involving the same entity, the same addresses within a window of I don't know, a month or a week, you may not run the same validation again. Yeah. So another important thing to consider is that the travel rule, it cannot operate alone. So there are some complementary tools that you need to have. Going back to the first slide about blockchain analytics and KYC, well, those are the two complementary processes and tools that need to be there. So at Osprey, we have one is the specific blockchain analytic module that connect with different companies, and that give us a huge range of possibilities to cover a lot of blockchains. Right now, we have integration with Confirm, Crystal, Blockchain Intelligence Group, then a few more that are coming that are going to be announced very soon. Yeah, so essentially the idea of the blockchain analytics is what we've been discussing before, right? So now the only thing is that I'm presenting this in the context of the travel rule, right? So how this is important? Well, so now you are going to exchange your customer data with another entity. So you may, for example, screen the recipient address before the transfer start, right? And that's when you use the blockchain analytic tool. So the way it works is you have to provide some details, like for example, the chain, the blockchain, the address or the transaction hash, run the verification, and typically what you get is a risk score plus a number of attributes. So for example, if the risk score is high, then the second question is, okay, why is high? So then you have, okay, so this address is linked to an OFAC sanctioned entity. It's a high risk exchange. So you have a list of attributes that help you understand why the address is high risk, right? So the idea is that you can use this information to make decisions, right? Think that at the end of the day, you may have, if there is a transaction that gets blocked, as Andrea was talking before, at the end, what you will have is a compliance officer that is going to review the case, right? So the idea is that we equip that team to make decisions, better decisions, right? So what you can see here is essentially the result of one specific address that has two risk scores coming from two different data sources. One is Crystal and the other one is Blockchain Intelligence Group. And what you see here are the descriptors, right? So this, think about what I was talking before about labels. Well, so this is what I mean. So the descriptor that help you, so give the attributes of explain the reason why the address is high risk, right? And what you can see here is the controlling entity, right? So in most cases, blockchain analytic companies are able to identify the controlling entity. Of course, there are these situations that we were talking before when you have a layer 2 company on top, or when you have an unhosted wallet sending to an exchange, right? So there is not an entity behind. It's a ledger, a nano ledger, right? Yeah, for those cases, there are some tests that you can run. Maybe we can talk about that later. But conceptually, this is the process. So when you are sending or when you're receiving a payment, you can screen the transaction or the recipient address, identify the risk. If there is something that it could be considered high risk or cross some threshold that it's are indicated in the policies, you may not continue with the transfer that is going out or the transfer that is coming to you, right?
Excellent. So do you
Yep.
think it is also going to be helpful in scenarios like running payrolls, for example? Just this evening when we were syncing up, I was giving you that example, right? That, for example, if a company is running payroll and sending out money in crypto to its freelancers across the world, does it make sense for such companies as well?
You mean paying salaries to employees, for example?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. So we don't have any company doing that yet, but I think so. Well,
See,
well,
new
I mean,
ideas for you.
I mean, yeah, it's a good point. So the travel will, depending the jurisdiction, apply to any transaction. So the threshold may set the amount of data you need to exchange, right? And when I talk about threshold, means the transaction amount threshold, right? The general principle is that the larger the payment, the higher the risk. So when the risk is higher, then you need to provide more information, right? So so if the payment is a one-time payment, the salary is high, I think that there is of course a situation where the trial will apply, and you may need to run these checks. Yeah.
Both ways, both ways. So this is an interesting topic. I don't know about the others, but I'm finding it very interesting. I'm sort of alive at 2 o'clock, 2:07 in the night. So we are, but just a quick reminder, we're past the time of the show,
Oh,
but
okay.
this discussion is still so interesting. And there's also one very important thing. Look who showed up on the baseline show today. Uh, John Walpert's clock. So let's welcome John back on the show.
Oh.
Hi John, how's it going?
Hey,
How does it feel to be listening to the baseline tune once again?
how did you get that?
Okay.
Oh, there are, just like Osprey, there are multiple tools out there.
Nice.
Baseline.
Okay,
All right.
how do we stop it?
Well, there you go.
There we go.
Is that how it sounds when I used to play it?
Yes.
I've never been on the receiving end of it. It's good to see everybody.
Good to see you too, John.
I saw Mark Haddle at All Things Open in Raleigh. That was fun.
Yes.
Yeah, he had joined from the conference and he was mentioning that you were around and your talk was just about to happen.
We even made it on Twitter.
John, when you get walk-on music, you don't look surprised. You just gratefully look like it's your due. That's not a
It's all
flinch.
that experience on Leno and Jimmy Fallon.
That's
No,
it.
I'm kidding. It's good to see everybody. Just thought I'd call in and say hi.
Thank you so much, John. So good to see you and all.
Yeah,
healthy.
congratulations on the elections, and it's really nice to see a whole new generation of people taking leadership on the project. That's exactly why folks like York and Paul Brody and I wanted to fade out. So if you can't fade out and have it still survive, then you know that you didn't build anything that'll last.
So did any really big blockchain, savior inducing platforms kind of go out to the sunset this week?
Yeah, I heard something in the news.
About
Big, highly touted black.
future of trade.
Trade lens is done.
Trade lens is done.
yeah, I posted on LinkedIn about that. Look, my journey on blockchain has been, I got involved with blockchain because somebody told me it was a dumb idea. And I'm like, okay, well, then it's worthy of investigating. And then we investigated private permission blockchains or PLTs and discovered that they were, as somebody called it, complicated spanner, if anybody knows the Google technology.
Uh-huh.
And unnecessary. If for most things, I think the conclusions are in. I don't know that you use them for much in enterprise, and certainly what we're seeing. It's better to have a database and an administrator, and if you want everybody to feel like they have control, do Shamir secret sharing on the root keys. and use a
Yeah.
plurality of people, so that you have a plurality of administrators to turn their key in order to make changes to the system. But yeah, you hire an administrator, you have a consortium, and you use good things that have good access control lists to manage it.
Yeah.
Now, public blockchain has its own things that don't make sense, and using it, a world computer is not. And I still stand on the idea that whether you call it the baseline protocol or not, the internet needs a ordering and hash management service, and the blockchain is a sensible thing to use for that. You need an always-on deterministic state machine that it resists tampering. I just wouldn't put a lot of data on it, and I wouldn't necessarily rely on L1 smart contracts to run my business logic. But good place to put hashes and proofs.
Global settlement layer, they're calling it.
It sounds like I know who came up with that. He used to be my boss, and arguing with him about it. He's a great guy. But settlement is a word that takes me away from understanding very specifically what I'm talking about. Depositing hashes or proofs in Merkle trees on an always-on tamper-resistant state machine that's easily addressable. The only thing I'd like to see on L1s and L2s is easier addressability. Like I want to kind of like, remember when note-taking systems started allowing you to just put a URL, make any note or any item in like workflowy a URL that was addressable. I'd love to be able to have, just as easily do that to a location that I'm eventually going to drop a proof into, so that I can say, hey, keep an eye on this thing. And when something happens, do whatever you were supposed to do.
John, funny that you're mentioning it. Because the L2 working group is shortly publishing a new draft standard about EVM-based address aliasing.
There you go. Yeah, I think that what no matter what happens with cryptocurrency, whether it becomes the BitTorrent of money or rises again, don't care, never have, never made much money on that anyway. I'm not a good gambler, but I very much think that the EVM, and Andreas, I think you convinced me of this, the EVM has turned out to be a very likely candidate for everybody's favorite deterministic state machine that you might want to put into whatever stack you have for whatever reason, whether it involves a blockchain or not.
That is correct, because it's just like JavaScript.
Yeah, so it's easy, relatively easy, and I think that there are probably likely sensible, not stupid use cases that don't involve speculation and hype that will discover that they need that for a variety of things in the infrastructure that is the internet and web services.
Correct.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. The EVM is the deterministic equivalent of the Java runtime environment, basically. And Solidity
maybe those
is
things
JavaScript.
merge over time, or bits and pieces of them merge. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm getting involved in a new thing. It's called computers. I think it's the future. Yeah. I'm over Web3. That's that buzzword's, that's tired.
So did you go all the way up to Web 5 or you return from Web 3?
No, I'm going I think computers, everybody's talking about computers these days. I think computers are the next big thing.
And they let you send something called as email.
And I've been hearing about this thing called the internet. I'm really into that too.
Yeah.
I think it's here to stay. I really do. Anyway, it's good to see you guys.
Show on the 1st of December in 2022.
We'll have to check
I will have to say, John, one of your most enduring contributions, I think, to the community is definitely in any private permissioned blockchain solution, the digital nudist colony. that just resonated. That's just boom.
Oh, you mean the yeah, a private blockchain is a digital nudist
Private
colony on a
permission
private
is basically
page.
a digital
Yeah.
nudist colony, which,
Somebody was like, yeah, well, that's still more secure. And I'm like, not until somebody shows up with a camera.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's
Somebody
one of
leaves
those,
the gate open.
you know, at first thought, you're like, well, hey, and then at second, third, and every other thought, you're like, no, that's no, I don't know.
Javier, I enjoyed your talk.
No, I mean it's interesting. But I mean it's a little bit out of my domain. So we specialize in compliance, so there are so many things going on in inside crypto that it's not exactly what we do. But it's yeah, always interesting to.
You might seek out. There's a guy named Aaron Lieber who is I have a lot of time for him. He's a really good product exec and was the and is Trade Lenses product guy, and he has a lot of thoughts about compliance. He's definitely worth getting to know.
Did you find it interesting, the topic that I was talking about?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting if you actually think what is being done as being put into zero knowledge proofs. So you're not actually having to move PII around. So that's the next big thing is in my opinion is because no one wants PII anymore, because and I think Jamie has a couple of thoughts on that, but litigation is going to only increase exponentially in the data privacy space.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, no one wants to share or wants to move data, PII data around anymore, because it's way too risky, because as soon as it leaves your environment, you have lost control over it, and no one wants to take that risk anymore, because you need to trust that the other guy doesn't lose it, and then because of GDPR and so forth, you're on the hook, even though you're no, or CCPA, and even though you're not really have control over it anymore, it's the other guy who has control over a copy. I think this is going to drive toward.
There are a lot of risk. I agree, and there is some cases there is a debate of what should prevail, the travel rule of privacy policy, right? Because you as think about it also, let's say if you are a company in London and you're making a transfer to another company, I don't know, in Morocco. So the data standard that may follow in the other country may be completely different from the sender location, right? So, but it's still,
yeah, I wouldn't want my private data to be in Morocco, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it's like so the key thing is, can I prove things about myself that anybody can verify without revealing the actual data? That's because what you're in compliance, you're proving statements. You're not proving data, you're proving statements. Mm-hmm. And statements can be cast in computer science terms as predicates. And if you can form a predicate that has a definitive yes or no answer to it, you can cast that into a cryptographic system that can prove correctness of that statement. So it's just being a bit more creative with where you're at.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on right now. I do agree that many things that are happening in crypto, it's because the people that is writing regulation for crypto is the same people that wrote regulation for banking. So essentially, they are just copy pasting stuff.
I think they're just casting around for stuff, trying to find something that works, that lasts, and that makes sense long term, that it isn't hype based. And yeah. So what do you wind up doing? You wind up reinventing all the old stuff. I think that's well established now. I think that especially post FTX, everybody's getting on that. And there's it's funny. Somebody sent out the spin script, and so now you're hearing all the spin. It's like, SBF was a bad guy, and I'm like, yeah, well, a week ago you were saying he was great, so I don't know what that's. Oh, okay, you got the spin script, okay, and trying to encapsulate the damage, and I'm like, well, no, that was a symptom of a deeper issue, which is, oh yeah, this isn't currency, and it's not gold, it's digital bearer bonds. That's the perfect use case for cryptocurrency. Digital bearer bonds. But the joke's on the people who are using it, because it turns out in an age of AI, they're not quite so as untraceable as bearer bonds were. If you don't want a paper trail, use paper, right? So, if I was the NSA, I would be joyously accumulating data right now and just encouraging everyone who's moving money across borders untraceably to continue using cryptocurrency to do that.
I think that was a good statement, John, when you said if you don't want a paper trail, use paper. I mean, that's literally true. You can burn paper.
Well, it's uncanny, right? That we enforced openness on, the U.S. and others, I think 80 countries enforced openness on banking information between 2008 and 2015, and that's just when cryptocurrency was really kicking in. And so you can imagine, I think, cryptocurrency probably still will be a thing, because there are people with a lot of money that like moving it around the world pseudo untraceably with impunity, with some liquidity. So they're going to keep using that. The question is, does that become money BitTorrent, where most normal people don't know what it is? Or does it become, foundational to the zeitgeist of the future? I don't know.
Well, I think one interesting thing with this, with the Ukraine conflict, has been how Russia, which is obviously a very technically sophisticated country, has been unable to use, any of the blockchain currencies to get around sanctions, on trading, right? That's, a bit of a lesson on it. If anything, it made it easier to enforce certain rules.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
at one point,
the best thing for, since FTX, let's all just agree, let's dump this Web3 thing and move to the new thing, which is called the web. And let's start improving the web with sensible stuff, including always on tamper resistant state machines where they're useful, and let's stop being so besotted by disruptive innovation, right? Do we need to move the entire financial system to a digital nudist colony in order to improve it? No. FedNow is going to do it next year. It's an improvement, right?
Right. But John, you must
instant.
say that Web3 it's like, I always like to see, it's like the innovation in Web3, especially around zero knowledge proofs, is like people laying fiber optics in the late 90s and then having to sell it on penny on the dollar because they were all going belly up. But that basically enabled, free information flow at virtually zero cost.
Yeah. HTTPS was pretty important. Was it a disruptive innovation? I don't know. But it certainly was an improvement.
The written off assets that allow real-time information exchange at virtually zero cost, I think was the big thing, right? It's like, so what my analogy here is saying, the zero knowledge technology is the, all the money that's put into to advance that is going to be utilized somewhere else very, very effectively. Because
zero knowledge is the new hash. Yeah, zero knowledge will be as pervasive and as important as hashing. It's just not necessarily required. It doesn't necessarily require blockchain to be useful.
And it doesn't require blockchain at all, unless you want to, something that's tempered. resistant, right? It's like it's the I think the for audit trailing, I think that's where blockchain is going to be used for. But
Yeah, no, if
otherwise,
cryptocurrency did nothing but pool a whole bunch of capital to fund the rapid acceleration of improvement or of development of zero knowledge cryptography, and that crypto at some point in the future will start being referred to as cryptography again and not cryptocurrency, then it will have done a nice job at the expense of a lot of people getting poor quickly, unfortunately.
that's what typically happens, right? It's like you have a whole bunch of investors that bet on the wrong horse, right? And it's like, but that's how, and then you write off the losses, but overall, it's as the larger picture, it moves the ball forward significantly, right? And helps solve massive problems that we have.
There's lots of things that I can do if I can prove that some attribute of my information to somebody else without actually giving them the information. That's a good thing. Just QED, like how many things can you use that for? I can't even count them all.
And that demonetizes, by the way. So the interesting thing is that entirely demonetizes the business model of the FANGs.
Well, I don't know about
or
that.
the Mangs,
but
well, if you don't change, if I can do the same thing without having to provide the data directly, but still have the proper attributes, right? Then that is you will have to change the business model. You have to think about how you can make money off of these statements rather than the underlying data.
I don't know. I'm still getting my head around the simple idea of, hey, I can prove to you that I know something without giving you the data. That's pretty awesome. I'll stick with that. I'm not sure I'm ready to end FANG, but we'll see.
In some cases, Andreas, there is a business behind that. Like, for example, KYC companies, they make money out of that. Why you need to run, they need to check your background many times. You open an account in one bank, and then you go to the neighbor bank, and then you need to provide the same data again for them to do exactly the same check. Right? It's because
which sucks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
also, from a compliance client's point of view, it's horrible. It could be possible that you may only once, and then they share it, right? But KYC companies, they don't have any interest that happen because they make money off every check they run.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
This is one
Unfortunately, Javier, it's exactly right. It will happen, but by the time that's commonplace, some of you on this call are going to look like some of us on this call.
We'll see. Sometimes
and we will
sometimes
look like
go faster.
Dirt.
we're take a dirt nap. Yeah. But who knows? Things sometimes change faster than anticipated, right? Exponential behavior. For a long time, nothing changes, and then
anyway, I didn't mean to make us go over. I just wanted to say hi, but I couldn't resist.
Great conversation, and I'm sure Javier is also enjoying it because he chose to stay back. It's almost 2:30 here, and I texted him like 20 minutes ago that please feel free to drop off because it's 2:30 tonight, and he still stayed back. So
no, don't worry. And actually, I see that I'm checking some of your profiles on LinkedIn, and I'm sure that what I presented today, you may have some very strong opinion. So yeah, happy to get your feedback.
Excellent,
yes.
Excellent. And Javier is also raising funds, so I hope that Javier, all the best with that. We hope that you raise some funds and you bring Osprey all across the world.
Yeah,
all of us.
Take it in fiat.
Yeah.
In fiat.
All right. See you guys. Bye.
All right. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, one second. We need to play the baseline song. Thanks everybody who tuned in, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
See ya.